Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. So a lot of you are either new to Destiny and want to jump in at Destiny 2 for the first time, or alternatively you've been playing the game for 3 years now and you know nothing about what's going on. It's time to fix that. This video is going to go over the entire story of Destiny leading up to Destiny 2. Now keep in mind, I'm going to include everything that I think is really important for newly minted players or someone who's just jumping back into the world again, so that you can all understand the base story and the world that Bungie has constructed. So don't expect me to jump into too many deep stories. For example, I'm not going to be exploring the Book of Sorrows or full achievements of the Iron Lords. I'm certainly not going to be talking about Dredgen Yor and Jaren Ward because their story is not too relevant to everything we do in-game, and I'm also going to be avoiding things about mysterious topics that we have clearly got so much left to discover, such as the Nine. Regardless, I have a few other things to say before we start. Firstly, note that whenever I go into the City Age portion of this video and all of the history of Destiny, things are going to get a little bit nondescript, and that's purely because we don't have a lot of timeline references for what happened when in the City Age. The way that I'm presenting this is going to be the most logical string of events, and hopefully it's something which is close to the most accurate version of events. Also, there are two people that deserve shoutouts for the help that they've given on this video, the first of which is Octavius, who has helped create a lot of the skeleton for this script, which is now about 17 pages long. He most certainly worked his heart out for this, and I know that he is someone who deserves praise as a result. And secondly, Xander, who is the one who has done a lot of the graphics work and doing cutouts of the various Guardians that are being represented throughout Destiny's timeline. Thanks and praise for both of those two in the comments section would be greatly appreciated. They have put a lot of work into this video just as I have. But without much further ado, let's begin. Starting with the modern day, and principally with an event that will change humanity forever. Imagine that tomorrow, when you all wake up, you turn on the morning news and all of a sudden you see that a mysterious object has appeared over Mars. This is the premise for the start of our modern timeline to Destiny. Something where all of a sudden humanity is presented with the notion that they are indeed not alone in the universe. And 14 months later, humanity has prepared its response. The globe has, for but a small period of time, united, and the astronauts of America, taikonauts of China, and cosmonauts of Russia have each chosen one of their best to take on this great honor and responsibility of the first manned mission to Mars, the mission that would live in history and would be known as Ares 1. These three would then take it upon themselves to explore the surface of Mars, to approach the unknown object, and to understand what had happened. Mars, of course, is a planet with little to no atmosphere, and yet when Ares 1, the craft, came down onto the Martian surface, it came down in the middle of a storm. The breath of God as the wind rattled off of their craft. This was no coincidence. As the three explorers left their craft and set their sights upon the alien object, they realized for the first time one of its functions. It was terraforming Mars. And so, together, an astronaut, a cosmonaut, and a taikonaut stood and bore witness to the first Martian rains, and set their eyes upon the traveler. This would begin what is known as humanity's Golden Age, a time of incredible accomplishment in which humanity has made so many wonders that have now been lost. Human lifespans, for starters, were tripled. Those that lived to 100 in our day would be seen as some of the most long-lived of our species, but in their times, 90 was considered to be young. 300-year-old humans finally existed. All fundamental hatreds and intolerances quickly vanished, and, in a similar sense, the peoples of many nations merged. Nations meaning so much less when the people themselves are united in a common understanding that was born from this simple idea that we were not bound for our petty grievances and poorly thought out wars, but instead, we were born to conquer the stars. Our culture became founded in reasoning, intellectualism, and science, supporting core principles of debate on all sides and on all topics. Centers were founded in the name of progress and reason, the Ishtar Academy on Venus, for example, or the city of Freehold in the dusty red sands of Mars. And then there were other great human marvels. The Baikonur Cosmodrome was set into a massive center of exploration and colonization, and the great metropolis cityscapes of Titan rose above the waves. Truly, these are some of humanity's greatest miracles. Our technology advanced tenfold as well. The Centers of Science and Reasoning in the Ishtar Academy on Venus discovered an ancient alien race and their ruins. These were the Vex, and they had existed for many millennia before we had. But even then, there were greater discoveries still made by Clovis Bray. The fourth state of matter, known as engram, was finally unveiled. This is a state in which data was free from the physical restraints of matter, and in which all sorts of ideas could be created and stored with the simplest of actions. But there were so many more inventions than simply these. Take the war mines, for example, which were the pinnacle of Golden Age technology. From their massive complexes of underground bunkers, they could go forth, bearing weapons capable of scorching the skies of 1,000 worlds black with dust and fire. With their vast artificial intelligence, they could draw up battle plans to counter and defeat the most ingenious of foes in but the blink of an eye, and with their armies of constructs and frames, they could shatter regimes and blunt offensives from entire legions, one at a time or all at once. These were some of humanity's greatest weapons in the Golden Age, our greatest defenders. But in addition to this, came yet more curious forms of life. The Ahamkara are one of particular note, but there are none as well known to us now as the Exos. These sentient machines appear to have been created by the Clovis Bray Corporation as well. It's speculated by some that these are humans who are able to transfer their consciousness into a mechanical body and thus, theoretically, live forever. Regardless, science by this point had advanced so much that the Exos were considered as valid members of society, just as anyone else would be. Though their programming also hints that their nature is a more violent one. They are built and programmed for a relentless war, some great battle long ago forgotten. This is remembered as every single one of them dreams of the Deep Stone Crypt, where they fight an army of thousands of those that they know. But finally, yet another of the inventions of the Clovis Bray Corporation would be once more something that would bear fruit during the Golden Age and its colonization efforts. The invention of a nanotechnology that could be programmed into anything imaginable. This was Siva. It could be simply directed with one's own will, and could do anything from creating habitation to rebreather suits. Such was the marvel of Siva as a technology that immediately it began to be used by Golden Age colonists looking to expand out into the stars. At this point, humanity's greatness shone like a beacon in the night, illuminating the stars and convincing us that our destiny was not to remain on Earth alone, falling prey to our petty squabbles from so many years ago, but was instead to ascend to greater heights. But as Icarus and Daedalus learned in the stories of old, pride can quickly turn to hubris. And so it was the way for us. Our Golden Age and its days of glory were numbered. From beyond the reaches of our solar system, the war mines detected something, a subtle set of signs, but they knew how to interpret their meaning. Something was approaching, something that spelled our doom. It was at this moment that the Exodus Project truly began, our great effort to save our people from near certain annihilation. Millions of people were loaded onto colony ships, bound for destinations beyond the reaches of the oncoming catastrophe. But in spite of our efforts, in spite of the work of all the war mines, in spite of the submines like Malahayati, and in spite of General Chen Lanshu and her valiant efforts, it was too little, too late. As the thousands of vessels began to reach the outer edges of the asteroid belt, something terrible began to sweep through the solar system. The war mines raised their mighty weapons to respond with forceful blows that could shatter the stars, and yet even this could not stop the oncoming tide. This force swept through the space that we had known and conquered and decimated all that stood in its way. Those unfortunate enough to be on board the colony ships died in their stasis pods, and the debris from the destruction caused the creation of a vile wreath of dead ships and orbiting stations in the asteroid belt. The rubble from this terrifying event still remains to this day. In the chaos and struggle, the Warmind Rasputin, the first and greatest of the Warminds, the very defender of Earth itself, our home planet, the jewel of our stars, could comprehend the terrible power of this new threat. It was not simply the many alien races that had come and conquered our diverse territories. No, this was something more powerful. Something that reached beyond the bounds of the physical universe. Something that defied simple causality. Something that could even bend the universe to its will, much like the Traveler could. This was our ultimate enemy. The one that we would come to know as the Darkness. This terrible miasma that would wind its way through every coiled path, choking and draining the life from all that it touched. But even here, Rasputin could sense yet another threat. The Traveler was on the move. Once more it was leaving the system, and without the Traveler, all of humanity was certainly doomed. What happened next is not clear. Records of this time are all but lost, our best source being the journals of Cayde-6. They speak of a terrible time of cataclysm, of how the Darkness took hold of entire worlds and every living being on those worlds, taking each of them individually in its grasp, leaving them in agony but allowing them to maintain their clarity of vision. It wanted them to see this. It wanted them to see the engulfing of worlds around them, letting every last one of them, every lost life, echo undeniably with one bit of knowledge. Our worlds no longer belonged to us. They belonged to the Darkness, and our destruction at its hands were for the sin of our strength not being great enough. Some speculate that what happened next was the actions of Rasputin, who might have attacked the Traveler in order to prevent its departure. Others state that the Traveler simply took pity upon us all and would have died regardless to save us. And some still state that the Traveler was not retreating at all, but merely trying to find the perfect patch of ground from which it might be able to battle the Darkness. But what is clear is this: the Darkness and the Traveler both battled above Earth in a contest of power that would shake the heavens and the very foundations of the universe. And what is more, the Traveler won. Crippled and broken but victorious, in those last moments of its dying breath, the Traveler created the Ghosts, small autonomous drones filled with its light. These ghosts would be the salvation of humanity, by seeking out those amongst the long dead who would be capable of wielding the Traveler's light as a weapon. Something to fight back the Darkness, something that could save us. Whilst they would first be known as the Risen, and would eventually be called Warlords or Iron Lords, these brave souls chosen to fight again within the Traveler's light would be known to us today by a single name. They would be known as the Guardians. On the fringes of the solar system, just as this was occurring, yet another new form of life was appearing. With their grey skin and the potent mixture of both light and darkness running through their veins, the Awoken began to first appear. But even on the horizon, there was yet more ill news. Strange and deadly alien forces that had arrived with the collapse were encroaching still on the territories of what remained of our Golden Age colonies. These four races would come to be known by the remaining peoples of Earth as the Fallen, Hive, Vex, and Cabal. And so, with humanity crippled, our Golden Age lost and our system being overrun by hostile forces, the near-apocalyptic events that would come to be known as the Collapse came to a close, and the Dark Age of humanity began. At first, there were very few people who remained united. Some formed into small towns and banded together for safety, but many on Earth came to be ruled over by the Warlords. These were some of the first Risen, who instead of using their power for good, would come to use their powers for dominance. They ruled over Earth and would use their powers to control the vast tracts of its territory. In opposition to these forces, however, there were some that stood against the despair of autocracy that had been wrought, some who stood against the tyranny of the Warlords and stated that hope should still be at the center of the human life. Everyone deserved a chance. Led by a man named Radagast, the first protectors of humanity would rise to defend us. They would be known as the Iron Lords, and whilst refugees and small towns cowered under the tyranny of the warlords, the Iron Lords came to their defense, liberating them and defending those who stood against tyranny. All the while, there were refugees still seeking a place to call home. Long, continuous columns of exo-survivors, humans cropping up from everywhere, the occasional awoken travelling far from their reef-born home. Many travelled to below the Traveller, to the spot of its final climactic battle with the darkness. These refugees would organise into a massive camp, defended once more by those risen with the Traveller's light, great men and women like Reza Lazir. But as time went on, the dissolution of those within this camp of refugees turned into something more violent. Rudimentary factions began to rise, each with their own opinions on how we should lead humanity back to prosperity. From these differences, the first faction wars arose. Had it not been for those that stood and stopped the terrible violence, humanity might well have been snuffed out right then and there. But from the aftermath of this first faction war, the leaders of the city created a new system of governance. The factions would be forever tempered by each other's wills, as well as the newly created Vanguard, a council of 3 guardians, one of each discipline: Hunter, Warlock, and Titan. All proposals would be voted upon and would be sent to the Speaker, the Grand Leader of the city, and the ruler of the Guardian Orders. All of this had to go through him for approval. And so the passion of the factions was put in check, the authority of the Guardians was made clear, and the first ever consensus council of the city resolved to be better and greater than those that came before. And that resolve would soon be put to a test. For the next challenge would not come from within, but from without. The alien races that had arrived in force at the close of the collapse had taken root in both our outer colonies and in the vast territories on Earth. From the Mumbai Push to the European Dead Zone, from the swamps of Old Chicago to the abandoned Cosmodrome at Baikonur. With this, the city had to face against incursions by one particularly craven alien race, known as the Fallen. Previously they had been known as Elixni, but these bipedal aliens had changed ever since they had been uplifted by the Traveller. It had left them too, and this had turned them from a once noble race into a race of spider-like pirates, scavengers, forever hunting the Traveller, or the Great Machine as they called it in their time. They sought to return it to their fold, so that their species might hopefully enjoy the bounties of a second Golden Age as a result. But this would not be accomplished without bloodshed. And so what started as a small band of raiding parties taking on a small settlement evolved into a perpetual siege that would define the very existence of those that lived within the walls of this small city. And so, in response, the Titans of the city devised a plan. They built a great series of walls to encompass the city and keep those that they protected safe from harm. And so the walls were built, the city grew, and those within this final bastion found some small vestige of harmony. This is not to say that the city was the only place in which humans dwelled. Many towns within the wilds of Earth, such as the fabled settlement of Palamon, still stood, providing shelter and respite for those outside of the city. But such small towns, whilst occasionally raided by the Fallen, were but petty distractions. The true prize for the Fallen was the Great Machine itself, that rested in the sky above this last safe city, this well-defended bastion. And so, day by day, they sat in envy of humanity, until that envy became too great to contain. The House of Devils, located primarily within the abandoned territories of Europe, Russia, and Asia Minor, marched upon the city in force, bringing the full might of their house to bear. This was a true test of the city's new defenses, which had only recently been erected, but the Titan orders of the city were prepared. 4 orders of Titans came together and with coordination and steel held a defense that covered the 6 approaches of the city. The Fallen's artillery roared, and their legions of soldiers howled 1,000 curses at the battle lines of the city. But by the time the dust had settled, the Devils were forced to retreat en masse, and not a single one of these 6 fronts had broken. This was the first true trial of the city and its defenders, and from this day forth would be known as the Battle of the 6 Fronts. It would forevermore be remembered as a symbol that marks Titan iconography to this day, and would also give rise to some of the most legendary guardians the city has ever known. But most importantly of all, this marked the beginning of a new age, an age where humanity could find newly restored hope under the Traveler's shadow. This would be known as the City Age, the time where we started to fight back. In the aftermath of the Battle of the 6 Fronts, one of the most notorious defenders of the city was a warlock, who was said from eyewitness reports to have appeared as if he was fighting in multiple places all at once. The name of this powerful warlock was Osiris, and so great was his power that many of the other heroes of the city began to rally around him, most notably the honored Exo-Titan known as Saint 14. He called upon the speaker to appoint Osiris to the Vanguard as its warlock mentor. Such was the speaker's relationship to Saint 14 that the two took to each other's words with great care. They even referred to each other as father and son. And so Saint 14, joining the chorus of supporting voices, convinced the speaker to appoint Osiris to the Warlock Vanguard position. To join them, going even as far as to take him as his own apprentice, to teach him what he knew, so that one day perhaps he might become the new speaker for the Traveler. However, there was one dissenting voice amongst the cheerful applause when this decision was made. Lysander of the Concordat, a faction that had grown in the infancy of the city, stated that Osiris was a mistake, that he had been misincarnated, a faulty resurrection by a damaged ghost perhaps, or maybe simply someone who wasn't supposed to be a guardian. His claims were quickly dismissed, and the consensus continued its work, with Osiris now as one of the most senior members of its council. Meanwhile, as some new legends rose, others were sadly doomed to fall. The Iron Lords had grown considerably in their strength and had conquered the Warlords entirely from their fortress temple at Vostok Observatory. From above, they watched over the vast lands of our forefathers and kept a steady vigil, defending the city and the rest of humanity from afar. But as their ranks swelled to hundreds and the fires of the Iron Temple grew stronger, their leader, Radagast, was filled with discontent. Him and many of the other Iron Lords sought a way to rekindle the Golden Age that they had lost. Lord Timur believed that he had discovered it, in the form of a Golden Age technology left behind by Clovis Bray, namely, Siva, the nanotechnology that could not only aid in the colonization efforts so far out in the far-flung colonial worlds, but could also reconstruct the marvels of humanity's Golden Age here at home, returning us to our place amongst the stars. But Radagast, who held so firmly to his belief that the technology of the past was the key to our future, was blinded to the true danger that Siva presented. More than 100 Iron Lords marched into the Cosmodrome to reclaim Siva, but Rasputin, who still maintained control of the nanotechnology, gave a directive to the billions of nanites that would spell doom for the Iron Lords. The directive was simple, 3 words initiated upon finishing a conversation he'd had with the Iron Lord Exo Warlock, Fellwinter. These 3 words: replicate, eliminate, immunize. And with that, Siva was unleashed upon the Iron Lords within the northeastern sector of the Cosmodrome, breaking them and consuming them all, one at a time. Only 9 Iron Lords managed to reach the replication chamber that was the source of all the Siva. In the end, Lady Yolda set off an explosion and sealed the doors of this chamber, thus preventing more Siva from escaping out onto the surface. By the end of the battle, the Iron Lords were crippled. Only 2 Iron Lords remained. The hunter, Lady Ephrodite, who quickly fled and abandoned her warlike ways for a path of peace, and Lord Saladin, who would be the lone sentinel to stand over the Iron Temple and watch its braziers dim once more. All the while, more threats were marshalling, and the city once again would have to face these terrible threats. Without the Iron Lords defending the territories of Earth or pushing back the fallen houses further, the city became vulnerable once more. And so, the Fallen once again began to create a great plan to reclaim the Traveler. However, in the light of the Devil's failure at the Battle of the Six Fronts, it was clear that no single house could conquer the city. And so, 4 fallen houses united to attack the city in unison. The houses of Devils, Kings, Winter, and Wolves united their forces into one of the greatest armadas that the system of Sol had ever borne witness to, and they began their march to Earth, so that eventually, even after a long bloody battle, they might finally stand atop the corpses of those humans that had defied them previously, and together reclaim the Great Machine. The might of these 4 houses combined would have been crushing to the city, particularly with the House of Wolves, who maintained a mighty fleet and a vast army of over 1 million fallen soldiers. And so, the Fallen descended upon the city, and the greatest battle that we had ever seen within the city's walls ensued. The defense of the city was to be taken up by 3 guardians. Lord Saladin, the former Iron Lord, would coordinate the defenses with his 2 protégés, Commander Zavala and Lord Shaxx. They would each take command of considerable forces within the city's walls, and all 3 were vital to the defense. Once again, the Guardians took to the walls, which were now heavily defended with salvaged weapon emplacements and thousands upon thousands of combat frames. Warlocks worked in concert, using great waves of void and solar light to drown the oncoming waves of fallen aggressors. The Titans manned the walls of the city with zeal and fortitude like they had done before, and the golden guns of the gunslingers rang out in song to answer the onslaught. But in spite of it all, the efforts of our great defenders weren't quite enough. The Fallen made significant advances, and eventually tore a hole in our defenses at Twilight Gap. With but a single breach in the walls and the city's defenses, our defenders could all in time be outflanked, and every last one of them could be brought to their knees. Whilst Lord Saladin ordered a tactical retreat, Lord Shaxx took action. He disobeyed this order and took all of the combat frames under his command, sending them to flood the breach, plugging the hole. He himself was found at the heart of this battle, along with the Guardians under his command, holding the line in spite of the lack of fortification, holding against almost all odds. The magnitude of this decision should not be understated. The frames and forces that Lord Shaxx had committed to the breach were vital parts of the defense force of the city. If his gambit failed, the city was doomed. There would not be enough forces to hold on the waves as all others retreated to the secondary lines of defense. But luckily for us, the gambit worked. The breach was plugged, and Lord Shaxx stood victorious with his frames atop a mountain of fallen corpses. The battle was won, and the city lived to see another day. The House of Devils, Kings, and Winter lay defeated. But what of the House of Wolves and their millions of soldiers? They had been noticeably absent from the Battle of the Twilight Gap, and this was no accident. Despite the bravery of Lord Shaxx and his forces that day, the city's true savior lay far out in the vacuum of space. Within the territories of the Reef, an awoken monarchy had begun to grow in power. This was the Vestian dynasty, and from their fold many noble names and houses rose, with an entire society at their heels. This was absolutely departed from the city. The Awoken as a society were matriarchal, fiercely territorial, a spacefaring people with an isolationist streak that demanded that they should live without revealing their presence to others. But before the Battle of the Twilight Gap, the 6th monarch of the Vestian dynasty, the 6th ruler on the throne beneath the Howling Dark, Mara Sov, Queen of the Awoken, was gifted with a choice. the House of Wolves had positioned their fleet at the asteroid of Ceres, and were poised to move further into the core worlds to strike at Earth when they had refueled from the asteroid's bounty. The Wolves had breached Awoken space and had violated their territorial borders in doing so, leaving Mara Sov with two choices. She could simply let the Wolves pass, letting their violation of Awoken space go unanswered, and thus dooming the city. Or alternatively, she could engage the Wolves at her door, showing them that the Awoken of the Reef were not a force to be trifled with. Two choices, one of peace potentially, and the other of certain war. A choice that would affect millions across the solar system, both human and Awoken, not to mention the Fallen. And Mara Sov chose war. She unleashed a weapon upon the fallen House of Wolves fleet called the Harbinger. This was a powerful enough weapon to destroy over half of their ships and more than 500,000 fallen soldiers, along with the entire asteroid of Ceres in the process. This would mark the beginning of a series of deep space sieges and great skirmishes known as the Reef Wars, where the House of Wolves, led by its newly founded Kell Skolas the Rabid, would face off against Mara Sov and her Awoken paladins of the Reef. In the end, thanks to the intervention of Variks, a fallen scribe of House Judgment, Skolas was captured. Variks and the Queen offered the Fallen of the Wolves a choice: either join and serve nobly under Mara, or join Skolas and languish within the prison of elders. Most of the Wolves joined Mara, given that their succession rules actually dictated that she technically should be their leader. She had slain the former Kell when she unleashed the Harbingers, and Skolas had merely picked up the pieces. But she paid for this victory with many Awoken lives. In the end, however, as a consequence of her actions, whether she meant it or not, whether she knew that it would be a bargaining chip later in her existence, or whether it was completely unexpectedly, she had saved the city with that choice. And back on Earth, they had sorely needed such relief. The Battle of the Twilight Gap had left the city weakened and desperate. The leader of the Concordat, Lysander, had chosen at this time, when the city was at its weakest and its defenders were weary, to rise up against the Speaker. But this rebellion was swiftly crushed by the troopers and guardians that had aligned themselves with New Monarchy. Their final battle at Bannerfall shows still the scars that Lysander has left on this city. Lysander himself spent the rest of his time in exile, fleeing the boundaries of our walls, leaving for the wilds, planning his inevitable return, plotting all the while. In the meantime, the Concordat was officially disbanded, and a new faction was chosen to join the Council of the Consensus, namely the Future War Cult. This sudden rebellion by Lysander, along with the major wounds that the Fallen had dealt to the city's defenders, led those within the city of great inspiration to come up with ways to improve our defenses and to hone our skills once again, if we would be attacked in the future. For these measures, we would most certainly be stronger. Faisal Crux and Victor Lomar of the Crux Lomar Foundry were some of the first. They decided to honor the Guardians that had fallen under the banners of the city at Twilight Gap, and they made such honors within a new weapons project from their foundry known as Project Heimdall. This honored those that had died in service of the city, forging their armor into a design of immense power, the Yalahorn shoulder-mounted launcher system, a weapon that roared with the fury of those Guardians that had fallen in battle and allowed their light to fight on even after they had perished. Meanwhile, Lord Shaxx had a plan of his own. Many of the Guardians that had died at Twilight Gap may well have been veterans of great skill and power. Legends may have been lost in that battle that may never have been replaced, and replacing them with younger Guardians who were less wise left the city unquestionably weaker, not to mention the thinned numbers. So, Lord Shaxx presented the Consensus with a plan to clear out small portions of land and turn them into training areas in which Guardians would battle each other to hone their skills and earn glory. The approval for such a training system was given, and for the first time Guardians faced each other in the greatest challenge they had ever been provided. This would be a new venue, a new sport, a new pastime, but most importantly, it would be the moment in which the Crucible was founded. Eventually, the Crucible games grew to such a great magnitude that even for those in the city it became a televised pastime, with gambling on matches becoming commonplace and citizens wearing proudly the colors of their most beloved Crucible champions. Legends such as Thalor, Dredgen Yor, and Pahanin rose to prevalence because of the Crucible. At such a founding time of the Crucible, the city was still weakened, and so such happiness as being elated by the victory of a champion was far off. The city was still in its weakened state at this point, and so little time for such frivolity was found. This, of course, not only included the regular citizens of the city, but also those on the Consensus Council and the Vanguard. Our next tale turns to Osiris, who of course as a member of the Vanguard was central to the question of how the city should be defended, and he saw only one answer. He saw that the Fallen, the Hive, the Vex, and the Cabal weren't truly our enemy. No, they were puppets of a darker power that moved beyond the system's edge, slowly regrowing in magnitude and strength. Whether they were conscious and willing like the Hive, or unconscious and uncontrollable like the Fallen, they all served as but a distraction, as a means of weakening the city by attrition. The true enemy was the darkness, and Osiris believed that if we were to defeat the darkness, we would need to understand it. So at this time of great cost and great peril to the city, Osiris began to stray away from his duties as a Vanguard mentor. Instead, he chose to dabble in taboo, exploring Thanatonautics, the art of gleaning knowledge from beyond death. He chased the dragons of the Ahamkara for yet more of the lore surrounding them and their mysterious bargains, and even went on a hunt for the Agents of the Nine, the mysterious organization that occasionally visited the city with one of its agents, bringing incredibly rare gear in the process. By this point, Osiris had become a cult of personality amongst the guardians of the city. In the end, him and the Speaker were found at odds because of these taboo practices. Master and apprentice one day gathered in the Speaker's chambers. What was said that day is not recorded, but it is known that Osiris left that day in exile, taking many of his followers with him. Whether this was by his own choice, or by the Speaker's decree, is something not known, even to this day. However, his influence would have long-lasting effects on the tower, for many of those who had followed Osiris remained within the city, following his ways with their actions, if not with their feet. Whilst all of this was happening, there was one who decided to take it upon himself to be the vengeance of the city. The Titan Saint 14, who had originally called for the appointment of Osiris to the Vanguard, had studied well the Codex of the Firebreak Titan Order, and had come to a single conclusion. The best defense for the city was a strong offensive campaign of retribution, and so he began what would be known as the Crusades of Saint 14 against the Fallen Houses, decimating their forces that still surrounded the city wherever he found them. As each of these great houses was dealt a significant blow, the city ignited flares in great colours to celebrate Saint 14's victory. After enough time and destruction, all that remained was the Fallen House of Devils and their Kell Solkis. The Kell and Saint 14 engaged each other in single combat, and it looked at first as though the mighty Titan had at last found his match. The Kell was strangling him to death with but one of his 4 mighty arms. As a final desperate gambit, Saint 14 summoned all the light that he had left, all the remaining strength, and channeled it into a single mighty blow. The Kell of the House of Devils fell. His skull caved in from a single blow from Saint 14's own skull. With such a mighty feat accomplished, Saint 14 contacted the Speaker, and was informed by him personally that they would like the final one of the flares, Devil Red. But something still concerned the Speaker. Osiris had been sighted on Mercury, a place known for common Vex incursions, an entire world that had been converted into one of their machine planets. Knowing of this exiled warlock and the danger that he might pose, Saint 14 began a hunt for his former friend. In the end, both Saint 14 and Osiris disappeared, and neither have been seen to this day. However, Osiris still inspired many of the Guardians at home to action. One of those most famously driven to action by his words was a Titan known as Kabir, the Legionless. A maverick, much like Osiris, Kabir took it upon himself to begin a monumental task. He would enter the Vex stronghold below Venus, known as the Vault of Glass, and purge the Vex from it. For this task he enlisted 2 other Guardians. A renowned Guardian known as Pahanin, whose quips and phrases are commonly remembered by hunters to this day, be it the calling of their cloaks as frabjous, or simply telling them not to remind warlocks that they were taught to blink by warlocks. And secondly, a warlock known as Praedith, a warlock of the future war cult, who themselves are always obsessed with time, and thus the Vex were always of interest. Of the 3 of them that entered the vault, only one survived. Pahanin fled for his life from the vault after seeing the Vex within, and the fact that they had the power to remove all those that entered from the very reality of time itself. He would forever be haunted by the realization of their power, and would even install an artificial intelligence into one of his favorite weapons to ensure that he was never alone. For being erased by a Vex is not simply to die, it is to never have existed, to have all memory of your name rewritten and removed from the timeline itself. Praedith found himself lost among the warp and weft of time, imprisoned within the vault by the Vex until such a time as he was useful to them. And Kabir's fate was the worst, for he drank of the oracles, the Vex constructs that are designed to solve unfathomable computations. But when consumed, the Radioloria within them began to turn Kabir into a Vex. And so his memory was lost, save for his light, which he stored within a shield, so that those that followed might have a hope to breach the vault for themselves, and to finally defeat the terrible creatures within. Meanwhile, time passed, and despite the loss of many Guardians and the loss of many of those that had followed Osiris, the city returned to strength. The Vanguard turned its attention away from the defenses of the city and back to what it had thought of before, the further reaches and expansion of its territory and borders, beyond its walls. It was at this point that the city began to hunt down the Ahamkara. The great dragons had granted wishes in the past. The Bargains had gained the city considerable power, but they needed great power in those times so desperately that no one had thought of the great price that was also asked. For every bargain came with a debt to be repaid in time, and so the Ahamkara themselves, being deemed too dangerous to coexist with the city, were hunted to extinction. The only remains to this day are the bones, which some graft to weapons or armor. It is said that the bones of the Ahamkara whisper to those that hold them, guiding them, sometimes to glory and sometimes to ruin. There are some rumors that out in the Jovian moons the Ahamkara still live. A few small outlying colonies perhaps, clinging on to life. But they are far removed from the care of the city now, which once again had grown to great strength, becoming a thriving metropolis, with many towers lining its walls and many defenders ready and willing to hold against any aggressor that might come their way. As time passed and the city grew in strength, it also became much less wise. Hubris was waiting in the wings for humanity's last bastion to grow bold again, and they began to expand their reach into the wilds further and further. It was a perfect time for yet another calamity. Eventually, it was decided that a time of great reclamation should begin, and so our city's consensus set its sights on the first giant leap that had brought humanity closer to the Traveler, closer into space. The city set its sights on Luna, our only moon. The moon, for the longest time, had been occupied by the armies of the Hive that had invaded it during the collapse. They had burrowed into its surface and made a massive lunar fortress. The consensus believed that a united host of Guardians could break the Hive's hold on the moon. Lord Shaxx knew better. He burst into the consensus chambers just before the final decision was made, but in spite of his protests, he was overruled. And so, the first great Guardian army united under the banner of the Cormorant Seal and marched on the moon. Their force met resistance from the armies of the Hive, who, united by a great champion wreathed in green flame, pushed back the Guardians at the Battle of Mare Imbrium. This great Hive champion was one of their lesser gods, an undefeatable monster that slaughtered hundreds of Guardians upon his blade, destroying their ghosts in the process, making each of their deaths true and final. A warlock of the Praxic Order known as Eriana III would learn from a captured Hive wizard that this champion was known as Crota, the Light Eater. With Guardian casualties rising on all fronts, the onslaught against the Hive was called off. Guardians fled the surface of the moon en masse, and the events at Mare Imbrium would be remembered in infamy by a simple name. It would be forever known to those who lived within the city as the Great Disaster. Eriana III was amongst the Guardians that fled the moon, and she was amongst those that had lost a friend in the battle. Her name was Wei Ning, a famous titan that had died at Crota's very hands. She was everything that a titan could aspire to be. Headstrong, strong in other ways too, for her fist was unbreakable. She had once claimed that if she met the darkness in personal combat, she would simply defeat it by beating its skull with her fist as well. But when faced with a true champion of the Hive, an immortal god, she was not strong enough to stand. Eriana III, having lost such a dear friend, was amongst those who immediately felt a burning desire for revenge. And so she gathered other Guardians who felt the same. 5 in total were brought to her side, and they set out to make an assault on the Hellmouth once again. With her were the Guardians Eris Morn, Omar Agar, Sai Mota, Vel Tarlo, and the exiled warlock master of Hive Arcana, Toland, the Shattered One. They ventured into the Hellmouth and made a final assault on Crota's forces, hoping to slay the God Prince once and for all. Unfortunately, the fire team was met with a great deal of opposition, and such an endeavor was doomed to failure from the start. Vel Tarlo, the lone titan of the group, fell to the Darkblade and his army of Hive thrall. Sai Mota died at the hands of Omnigul, the will of Crota. Omar Agar was tortured to death by the heart of Crota, and his light was used to birth new generations of Hive thrall. Eriana III's last recorded logs came from the stills before the Netherrealm gates. It is perhaps possible that she made it through the keyhole into Crota's reality, where his true soul resided, before being snuffed out by Crota himself, who supposedly was unmoved by her light. And Toland, he did not die that day. Instead, his soul was torn from his body, which was destroyed by the Death Singer Yut. His presence would continue to float in the Nether Realms, guiding those who made an effort to resist the Hive, all the while floating between their dark Nether Realms, finding new power and knowledge along the way. Finally, there was only Eris Morn. Eris who had lost her ghost in the fighting. Eris who had lost her sight and clawed it back from those eyes of an acolyte. Eris who was the lone survivor of this ill-fated second fire team to assault the Hellmouth. She would survive in the darkness of its reaches for centuries before she would be found again and would return to the city. The city would never fully recover from the losses of the Great Disaster. The walls that the Titans maintained would no more be manned by thousands of Guardians. Now they were thinly posted, and the 8 towers that had been manned at the height of the city's power were reduced to but 1, and all around, the forces of the darkness began to close in. This persisted for what must have been centuries. The city was counting every day that it still stood. But then, one day, something happened. Your Guardian was reborn. In the lost mounds of corpses in the Cosmodrome of Old Russia, your ghost discovers you, and your rebirth occurs. Quickly you're assaulted by the fallen House of Devils, and your first initiative is to reclaim an old jump ship, just enough to reach the last safe city once again, returning to a home that you've never known, but a home that you will adopt nonetheless. When your ship is repaired, you head back to the Cosmodrome, killing Rixis, the Archon Rising of the House of Devils. He held within his possession a near-light-speed drive, thus something which could be used to upgrade your basic Arcadia jump ship into something that could now roam the stars. With such a great victory, you return home and speak with the Speaker himself. He told you of the terrible darkness that awaits outside the system, telling you of how the stories that children used to be told of the darkness and those terrible enemies are no longer being told at all, for fear that the children might be frightened. But now it makes no difference, because the children are frightened anyway. With this, you swore to fight the darkness and to push them back. No matter where you might find them or who they might be, you would fight for the city, for the light, and for the traveler. You eventually returned to the Cosmodrome, discovering the Hive and their foul nests on Earth, and realized, in a separate instance, that the Fallen were attempting to access Rasputin, the last known Warmind to still be alive. You activated a hidden array on old Russia's soil as well, unwittingly connecting Rasputin to all of the defense constructs across the system. Already in so little time, quite an exciting little adventure. But now was time to take on greater threats. The Prime Servitor of the House of Devils, Sepix Prime, had to be crippled, and in doing so you crippled the leadership of the house. Creating such a great blow meant that you had to set your sights on another territory. And so, discovering the Hive on Earth was a perfect reason for you to start venturing to the moon. You arrived there to find the House of Exiles, a new group of Fallen that had no house and were simply rebels disbanded from other Fallen groups. We tracked the trail of a Fallen Guardian to a structure made by the Hive known as the Temple of Crota. And we got our first glimpse of the Exo Stranger. The one with no time to explain, and yet one of the most important characters in our city's survival. We learned from the dead ghost we found within the Temple of Crota that the Hive were planning a massive invasion of Earth, and had been preparing for it for centuries, ever since they had infested the moon. We ventured further into the depths of the Hellmouth, and discovered in the Hive Fortress the ancient archive of these aliens known as the World's Grave. Through this, we uncovered the Hive's plans for the invasion of Earth, and more importantly, the fact that they had been making this plan for centuries, and that they had conquered thousands of worlds before ours. We heard about a legendary Hive sword next from the Cryptarchs, and find this lost sword in the depths of the Hellmouth once more. This is the sword that belonged to the Hive god Crota, the son of the Hive's taken king Oryx, who rules from afar. We used this sword and its dark power to slay the swarm princes found within the Hellmouth, before the blade itself shattered in our hands. We destroyed the shrine to Crota's father, the Hive god Oryx, and defeated its guardian, Sardok, his eye. Then, when we had dealt so much damage, peril had found us once more. The Speaker contacted us on an emergency channel, telling us and all other Guardians that were listening that the Hive were participating in a ritual to drain the Traveler of its light. With this, we assault the Hive's innermost depths of the Hellmouth once again, and this time, before we entered the Temple of Crota, we heard a message from the Exo Stranger. She told us through our comms to head to Venus to deal with a yet greater threat that rested somewhere within the Ishtar region. We still, however, entered the Hellmouth and defeated the wizards who were corrupting what turned out to be a shard of the Traveler, and using it to drain the light of the Traveler. Venus contained worse enemies than this somehow, and so we ventured forth, towards the sun, towards Venus and the Ishtar Sink, where for the first time we encountered the Vex, and learned from the Exo Stranger in the Ishtar Academy of the Black Garden, where the Heart of Darkness resided, and the Traveler was being slowly wounded from. She told us that the location of the Black Garden could only be learned from the Reef-born Awoken, and so we would endeavour to head to the Reef and meet with the Awoken Queen, Mara Sov. She promised us in a bargain that we would be able to access the Black Garden with a key, and she would provide such a key if we could only bring her the head of a Vex Gate Lord. Following this search in the ancient ruins of the Academy, the Ishtar Collective Archives were found, and we prevented their knowledge and information from falling to the House of Winter, who is persistently a threat within the bounds of Venus. Here, we also learned for the first time of the Vault of Glass, that infamous place that had consumed so many Guardians. To prevent further assaults on Venus, we assailed the stronghold of the House of Winter, killing their Kel Draxis in the process. Returning to our investigation of the Vex, we discovered by analyzing a Vex mind core that the Vex themselves are beings of one mind that can travel through time in order to accomplish their objectives. We also discovered in the process how to draw out a Vex Gate Lord from their gate system, and with this knowledge we began our assault on the largest collection of Vex Gates in Venus's Ishtar Sink, a place known as the Endless Steps. We drew out a Gate Lord known as Zydron, and we killed it, taking his head to the Awoken, who reluctantly removed its eye. It turns out that the Gate Lord's eye would be our key into the Black Garden, and it turns out that it also needed to be charged. They told us then that the Black Garden could be found on Mars, in Meridian Bay. We arrive in such a place and find it occupied by yet a fourth race, the Cabal, who have a running war with the Vex there. We make our way to the Black Garden Gate, realizing that we need to fight through the Cabal to make it into the Black Garden with this uncharged Gate Lord's eye. Next, we investigated the Vex below the city of Freehold and realized that they were in fact returning home, that the Black Garden was indeed the birthplace of the Vex themselves. We followed the Cabal into the reaches of the Dust Palace and discovered that Rasputin had indeed used the array that we had activated on Earth to worm his way into the cores of the Warmind of Mars. As our ghost would put it, Rasputin is everywhere now. Next, we decided to take the fight to the Cabal within their own warbase, but this was not a meaningless assault. Within the inner reaches of their base, the Cabal Blind Legion had contained a Vex Spire that would be capable of charging the Gate Lord's eye, allowing us entry into the Black Garden. With this, we also killed the Primus of the Blind Legion, dealing the Cabal efforts on Mars a serious blow. And finally, with a charged Gate Lord's eye, we took the fight to the Vex in the Black Garden, entering its folds and confronting the heart of the Black Garden, and a manifestation of the darkness itself that there was being worshipped by the Vex. They bound this immaterial object, this terrifying presence of the true darkness, into their own frames so that it could be corporeal and destroyable, but also so that they might drain its power. As a result, we destroyed the minds that had harbored this darkness, and in doing so, the Traveler was free to slowly heal. After confronting this threat, we returned to the city to find the Exo-Stranger waiting for us. She offered us her weapon as thanks, but more importantly warned us of the dark tidings that would be on the horizon. And so, unwilling to let these warnings go unheard or unanswered, we assembled a team and assaulted the Vex stronghold of the Vault of Glass. With the light of Kabir's shield that he had left behind, we were able to break the unbeatable shields of the Templar and Atheon that lay within. Such was the reality of the Vault, a terrifying testament to the full power of the Vex, who could bend time to their very will, erasing us from it if needs be, and yet we prevailed all the same. Guardians are able to shape their own fate, it would appear. Paracausality is not a trick of darkness alone. We too could bend the universe to our will. But darkness would soon test us. Eris Morn, who had lost herself for so many years in the harrowing passage of the Hellmouth's tunnels, would finally return. She heralded the arrival once again of a great threat that the city had faced long ago, of Crota, the son of Oryx, telling us that we must face this terrible threat of the Hive, or we would be destroyed. Crota's forces had begun the invasion of Earth, and so our first directive was to kill the Fist of Crota, one of his commanders in the major theater of war that had erupted across Earth's cosmodrome. Finally, having killed him, the Hive that had remained were left leaderless and unorganized, but a new leader quickly emerged in the form of Omnigul, the will of Crota, the mother of his spawn. She took over and then decided that a new target had to be set. She attempted to take over, or at very least, defeat the defenses of Rasputin. His internal Warmind bunker was not defended by the same nuclear weapons of Armageddon that he held. This required us to enter his bunker, the Seraphim Vault, and push back the forces of Omnigul. By doing this, we banished not only the power of the will of Crota for but a time, but also destroyed Crota's might. Following up after this, we hunted down his eyes and his heart, and all those other appendages of him that reached into our reality. And finally, the hunt for Omnigul herself began. She who had escaped would finally be found and thwarted, as she attempted to breed a new brood under the Skywatcher's Jovian complex. And with her death, the Hive would learn a new fear. Finally, we headed to the moon to find the soul of Crota himself. Within the Chamber of Night, we would discover this terrifying beast. We would destroy the crystal containing his soul, and thus prevent him from taking on a corporeal form within our reality. But Eris requested one last thing of us. We had yet another task. Crota had only been killed in a corporeal form. The crystal was not his end. To kill him truly, we had to venture into his netherworld. All Ascendant Hive have a form of pocket universe that their souls retreat into when badly wounded. It is within these netherverses that they can express their true power. They are most dangerous here. But also, if one is killed within their own netherrealm, they are dead forever. And so, Eris requested that we hunt down Crota's true form. By venturing into his Ascendant realm and seeking out his true form, we challenged Crota in the Sword Logic, the Hive's rule of unending slaughter in the universe. Using the combined might of our fire team and one of Crota's own blades, we sundered the God Prince of the Hive from existence once and for all. But with a terrifying scream that he let out in his final breath across the night, Crota called out, and the night would answer. It would take some time for that retribution to reach our shores, and since then, there had been other, smaller political movements that had cropped up. Skolas of the House of Wolves had previously been kept by the Queen of the Reef in the icy containment of a stasis pod in the Prison of Elders. She had since bargained him away to the Nine so that they might return some of her crows that had ventured into the Cauldron of Rhea. Skolas had been freed by the Nine, and was given a Ketch, one of the Fallen's great ships. He then used this newfound authority to incite rebellion amongst the fallen House of Wolves, forcing them to betray the Queen of the Reef, and then he set out to unite all the fallen houses under his one banner, led by Skolas, the self-appointed Kell of Kells. For this treachery of the fallen wolves and the sudden re-emergence of her great enemy Skolas the Rabid, Queen Mara Sov of the Awoken Reefborn promised to repay the debt of blood with as much suffering as she could offer Skolas. With this, she opened the borders of the reef to the guardians of the Last City, and told them all that if they wished great bounty, they should do no more than look to the reef, and it would be provided. We were summoned to the reef by Queen Mara Sov of the Awoken to repay the debt we owed for them aiding us in our infiltration of the Black Garden, and in order to repay her, we would need to aid her in the capture of Skolas, the newly appointed Kell of Kells. Firstly, we hunted him to the Ishtar Sink of Venus, where he escaped before we could capture him. He was, however, uniting both his house and the leaderless House of Winter in the process, and with them rallied to his banner, he had grown stronger. Next, we had to stop him from uniting any other houses, and so we headed to the Cosmodrome, attempting to stop Skolas' elite Silent Fang assassins from assimilating the House of Devils into their newly formed Kellship. These devils might have followed well enough if their leadership hadn't been spared by our action that day. We confronted the deadly assassins and won, killing a Fang commander in the process. And next, we hunted the command servitors of the wolves through the Cosmodrome, destroying them before cutting down the King Barons Paskin and Vekis, and the Wolf Baron Yavek, who were potentially breeding an alliance between the fallen House of Wolves and the House of Kings. To this day, it's worth noting that the Kell of the House of Kings has never been found. He is merely staying in the shadows, ruling like one of the Machiavellis of old. With no other fallen houses in the system that might bend the knee to him, Skolas was quickly running out of options. And so, we found him next, in the most unusual of places, in the weakened vault of glass that we had previously assaulted. We stopped him from tampering with Vex technology and bringing the systems of the vault to his knees in the form of the oracles that might erase us from existence. But, most importantly, we realized that Skolas had gathered valuable information about Vex technology. And finally, we tracked him to the heights of the Vex Citadel, where he had scaled to the top. There we would find the fallen wolves' forces had been empowered by Vex technology. Skolas could now pull them through time to aid him, and so we battled through them, finally engaging the Kell of Kells in personal combat. And after he was subdued, the Fallen was no longer at our mercy, but at the mercy of the Queen. Mara Sov captured him, and returned him to the reef so that he might languish once more within the Prison of Elders. She promised us great rewards when we returned, and we collected our rewards with the Queen's guard Petra. When captured, Skolas mentioned to the Queen and to Variks the Loyal, who still stood at the Queen's right hand, that he was afraid. Skolas was partly creating this new house as a way of more effectively shoring up the Fallen in general, for he had seen something, a coming shadow on the horizon that he feared. This was an effective small hint for the Queen, and Queen Mara gifted Skolas to Variks as a result. Variks returned him to the Prison of Elders, but the Queen left to ponder this matter more, and what it might mean. The Prison of Elders was the fallen arena of combat that Variks had created. Those that wished to be tried would be tried by combat, and so we faced Skolas one last time in the trial of the Wolf Kell, and defeated him, once and for all. As this occurred, and as the bonds between the city and the Reefborn Awoken became stronger, Eris Morn found herself travelling to the reef. She met there with either Osiris or a representative of Osiris's cult. They met first with the Queen's cantankerous brother, and then with the Queen herself. She listened to their words, and all of them affirmed what they knew. The death of Crota and his cry across the night was being answered. They would need to prepare for what came next, for Crota's father would not take the death of his only son lightly. Oryx was coming, and Mara agreed on that day to fight the Hive so that she might be able to give us a chance at defeating the Taken King. And so, with their fleets engaged, the Awoken would battle Oryx. His fleet would be mostly decimated, but so would the Queen in return. It is not known to this day whether the Queen lives or died that day, but what is known is this: Oryx had announced his presence in the system, and when he did so, he destroyed not only the Awoken fleet, but also brought to bear his most terrifying weapon. Oryx had the ability to abduct those that he saw as his enemies, even those he saw as his allies. With this, he could send them to a dimension where they would stand before the darkness, their personality would be disseminated, and they would be corrupted and filled with darkness itself. Returning them in portals that he would create through his own will, Oryx could then summon these troops to battle for him. These would be known as the Taken, and they would be a scourge upon our system forevermore. But this was all before our intervention. We headed to a Cabal firebase on Phobos, one of the 2 moons of Mars. Initially, we were there to investigate an openly broadcast Cabal signal. This was of great concern to the Vanguard. It could be the prelude to war if they were willing to break transmission ciphers. But once we arrived, we discovered what could only be described as a slaughterscape. Cabal were fleeing their base en masse, ships had been shot down, the base itself was in ruins, and strange dark portals dotted its walls. And for the first time, we encountered not only a visage of Oryx, who told us that our infection would die, the light that he saw within us, but also we encountered for the first time his mysterious Taken. At this point, we had no choice. We left as fast as we could, fleeing from Phobos post-haste so that we might get further advice from the Vanguard. Eris Morn at this point took it upon herself to explain the doom that had been wrought by the Taken King, the fact that the city was in grave danger. But Cayde, the Hunter Vanguard, was most certainly not going to take any of this lying down. He devised a plan and told us to take on the trail of a stealth drive that he had left in old Russia. We would mount this to Eris Morn's hive-covered ship, and would then use this to infiltrate the Dreadnought, Oryx's command ship, that would also be his Netherrealm, a paradox within our universe. We used the stealth drive to board the Dreadnought, knock out its weapon systems, and establish a transmat zone so other Guardians could land and invade. With our beachhead established, we began our hunt for Oryx, finding that the Cabal were assaulting a hive rupture. They had crashed one of their ships, the Dantalian Exodus 6, into the side of the Dreadnought, primarily so that they could destroy it, but also so they could hunt down Oryx and interrogate him. Oryx was not so easily captured, such was the hubris of the Cabal, and their commander, the Primus of the Skyburners, was taken by Oryx. We investigated the rupture that the Cabal had been assaulting for ourselves, but soon realized as we attempted to enter it, and thanks to Eris, that the only thing that could enter or will the ruptures to open was an Ascendant hive. Therefore, we needed some way to pass ourselves on as an Ascendant hive. As Eris said, become your enemy. Next, we returned to the moon, to the Chamber of Night that held Crota's soul. From this, we could take a shard from the crystal that had been used to transfer his essence between that of his sword realm and the physical universe, the very vessel that we had destroyed earlier. Barely escaping with our lives and a shard of the crystal, Oryx attempted to eradicate us once more. But our resolve was strong enough that even within the depths of the Hive Fortress, we found a way to escape. Next, we needed to head to Rasputin. The stealth drive that had been destroyed with Eris's ship was valuable, and the stealth code that Rasputin held was possibly one of the only things we could use to hide within Crota's realm. And here, we would indeed need to infiltrate, for we would need to imprison what remained of his soul within the crystal that held it. The crystal itself was left barren, and his soul was being prepared to move on in a death ceremony of sorts. We entered the Hellmouth once more with Rasputin's stealth codes, going straight to the stills, the darkness before the Oversoul throne. And there, we allowed the crystal to drink deep from the essence of the Hive Prince of Nightmares. On our way out, once again we were ambushed, but thanks to the help of Eris, we made it out unscathed. Finally, we returned to the Dreadnought with the soul of Crota in our grasp, and with this, the ruptures were opened, and we were allowed to pass as an Ascendant Hive. We entered the inner sanctum of the Dreadnought, finding our way to the altar of Oryx, who challenged us, telling us that darkness was liberation, and that by devouring our light we would be purer. Oryx fought us. But in the end, all of his power was naught. We defeated his physical form there at the altar, and in an act of desperation to save himself, Oryx took himself, transporting himself to a realm before the darkness. In doing so, he did irreparable damage and opened his throne world to be assaulted by our forces. This was unprecedented. This was the first time the Taken King in all of his majesty had truly been defeated by the light. He had even left his own sword behind, Willbreaker, the sword that drank the very essence of life. And Eris ventured to the altar of Oryx and claimed for herself a shard of Willbreaker. She made this available to us, and from this process of purification and crafting of Hadium, we forged the crystal into our own blades so that we might battle Oryx in his realm. Finally, we made our assault on the Taken King in his own nether realm, found within his Dreadnought. Facing powerful Ascendant Hive including the War Priest, Golgoroth and his two daughters Ur-Anuk and Ur-Halak, we finally faced Oryx the Taken King, first Navigator, Lord of Shapes, and ruler of the Osmium Throne. Blighted shadow of 1,000 graveyard worlds and heir to the High Court of War. But even with all of his might and titles, even with all of those times that he made doxologies in praise of the darkness, his body was destroyed, and Oryx, his pure form, was finally defeated. His form floated towards Saturn, a crystalline giant husk that might fall eventually into that world that might never be seen again. Whilst many would try to take the place of Oryx in the hierarchy, such as Moloch and Alak-Hul, we defeated them all too, thus keeping the Hive perpetually leaderless and disorganized. Never again would they be the threat that they had been in Sol. The actions of but a single Guardian had done all of the damage of the Great Disaster, and instead had wrought the Hive a terrible fate to suffer under other enemies. But we had not finished our business on the Dreadnought. We also killed in the process a pair of Cabal commanders who were attempting to detonate the Dreadnought's core. Upon defeating them, Dead Orbit traced a signal from the crashed Cabal ship within the Dreadnought's hull, the Dantalian Exodus 6. We traced back this signal to the ship and discovered after defeating many Taken and Cabal that the signal was being sent to the Cabal Empire, more specifically, to the leader of the Cabal Empire itself. This was a threat that we would have to answer at some point soon, but there were other menaces lurking on the horizon. The Fallen had come back into resurgence. The force of the House of Devils had made its way into the Cosmodrome once more, but more specifically, into a sector of the Cosmodrome that had been dark for decades, a sector known as the Plaguelands. Lord Saladin at this left his post at the Iron Banner, the tournament within the Crucible that for a long time had trained Guardians, and then took charge of the situation personally, much to the bewilderment of Guardians in the tower. At Saladin's request, we personally scaled Felwinter Peak and defended it from a retooled Sepix Prime, Sepix that had been resurrected and appeared to have been augmented with some kind of unfamiliar technology. For some reason, this great mechanical construct was capable of regeneration. We destroyed Sepix Prime once again, but with such regenerative power, it quickly retreated. And so, Saladin instructed us to pursue it back to the Cosmodrome. But before doing so, we entered the Iron Temple for the first time. Saladin had not ventured here for long periods of time himself, and so the honor was given to us. The Iron Lords were returning, and to signal this to the world, the braziers atop Felwinter Peak, by us, were lit once more. We arrived finally in the Cosmodrome and encountered fallen forces in great numbers. Nevertheless, we pushed through and gathered what data we could from a sensor grid near the entrance of this new area of the Cosmodrome. This was a strange instance, as it had been almost completely consumed by the same technology that covered Sepix. The Fallen responded to this invasion, coming from an entrance to a new area of the Cosmodrome. This area was the Plaguelands, and it had been locked away by the Iron Lords after their final assault had been made on the Siva replication chamber during the early City Age. From the Plaguelands, as we were downloading what remained of the archives, augmented Fallen assaulted our position. They had been covered in the new technology that had graced Sepix, the one that had also graced the sensor grid we were trying to salvage. They turned themselves into cyborgs with this powerful newfound substance. The substance that was the nanotechnology that had destroyed the Iron Lords, that we call Siva. Next, after discovering such a terrible fate had befallen the Iron Lords and the Fallen, we went into the Plaguelands, destroying a fallen stronghold there. We discovered that Siva had even resurrected the guns of the Golden Age that had fallen during the collapse. After taking down those guns, Shiro 4, the Vanguard scout assigned to Saladin and the Iron Temple, reinforced our beachhead that we had created by destroying these guns, and all the while Lord Saladin told us to meet him back at the Iron Temple so he could tell us the story of the Iron Lords and how they fell to Siva. Saladin told us this tale with great pain. He told us of how they failed to truly destroy the Siva replication chamber within the Plaguelands in spite of Yolda's detonation. With this, the task now falls to us to destroy this threat once and for all. After recounting the tale of the Iron Lords, we're told to seek out the Cryptarch Tyra Khan and her advice on the nature of Siva, and she pointed us to the Golden Age labs of its creation, on Mars, under Clovis Bray's roof in the Dust Palace. And so there we went, finding out more about Siva and that the Fallen had in fact learnt of the substance there, and had known to unleash it within the Cosmodrome because of such research. Finally, we headed back to the Plaguelands to destroy Siva once and for all. Having established that the Devils had a limited control over Siva, we overloaded their systems within the reactor that they had maintained, breaking their defenses and giving us a much-needed chance to get into the Siva replication chamber that they had built their Archon's fortress around. This replication chamber was where the Iron Lords fought Siva, and it was also where we would find their tomb. There we found that Siva had done something far more horrifying than simply create cyborg Fallen. The unrestrained Siva within the chamber that had survived had taken the bodies and light and presence of those Iron Lords and had augmented and corrupted them. We faced Siva Iron Lords, vile creatures that had been corrupted by Siva's influence, light forced to fight our light, and yet unable to stop themselves due to Siva's nanotechnology and its influence. Their bodies, their armor, and their weapons had been twisted to the will of Rasputin, whose final order had not simply been to immunize, but now was a new directive: consume, enhance, replicate. But this great technology of the Golden Age was not enough to compare to our light. And so we slew the terrifying forms of the reanimated Gellion, Fellwinter, and Yolda. We destroyed the Siva replicator and recovered Yolda's helm. Upon presenting it to Saladin, we proved ourselves worthy of an honor that none before us would know. We would be the first of a new generation of Iron Lords, our title put to great use, our honor and legacy born anew. And so our job was now extended. No longer were we simply a Guardian, we were a Lord Guardian. And after reforging a Yalahorn with Siva and other technologies at our disposal, our job became clear. The House of Devils had been stopped from creating more Siva, but this did not stop them from using that which they already had at their disposal. The House of Devils was on the move. Axis, the new Archon Prime of the Fallen Devils, had made a call to all Fallen across the system. He told them to turn themselves to the Perfection Complex in Old Russia, where he resided. He offered them cybernetic augmentations, which to the Fallen is akin to becoming a demigod, for they wish to ascend into machines. We assaulted this new stronghold of the House of Devils and destroyed the Archon Prime once and for all, so that he would never be able to unite those millions of Fallen still across our system and to begin a new assault on the city that would surely spell our doom. And now, with this moment of brief peace, began the Age of Triumph. The last age of the city. We had faced all the threats that we had seen. We had seen peace in our time. The children who had once been told of the darkness, and were afraid regardless of the stories no longer told, they were no longer afraid. They had heard our heroic deeds done, and they wished to imitate them. Pretending to be guardians, they were no longer living in fear. But even with this, darkness still loomed on the horizon. A darkness that we could not predict. A darkness that once again we would be weak to in our hubris. The Fallen had shown signals of retreat. In the Cosmodrome during a routine scouting run, the FOTC, the forces of the city, discovered that Fallen had retreated en masse and had piled all of their armor and heraldic flags in massive pyres and set them ablaze. The Fallen's retreat signaled the end of the 100-year siege that surrounded the city, which ordinarily would be a point of great joy. But in reality it was an omen of the coming war. And finally, we had the state the city was in now. You as an exalted guardian of the city, a Lord Guardian of the Iron Lords, the guardian who had slain Oryx, the Taken King, one of the darkest threats we had known, the one who had found justice for Eriana and Toland and Vel and Omar and Sai and Eris. The one who had defeated the Vex within the Vault of Glass, and the one who had slain the Kell of Kells. And at your side always were the 3 Vanguard mentors. Ikora Rey of the Warlocks, Commander Zavala of the Titans, and Cayde Six of the Hunters. But finally, on one fateful stormy night in the tower, the danger of the situation at present would be finally revealed, and our new enemy would at last unmask themselves.
Ikora, if you tell me this is a practical joke, well, it kills me to say it, but I would be really impressed.
Impressing you, Cayde, is the easiest thing I'll do all day.
Let's get serious, people.
Zavala, this is my serious face. Can't you tell?
Ikora, what have you got?
Someone or something has sabotaged the Skyline defense systems.
And comms have been spotty for the last few hours. Every sensor beyond the wall has gone dark.
Maybe it's just the storm. Maybe it's... What are the set feeds telling us?
Nothing.
Well, that's good, right?
No. I mean, they're not there. There are no satellites.
And that's not good.
Battle stations! Everyone with me, now!
Of course, this is not the full history of Destiny. We haven't got into ancient history, we haven't touched the story of the Thorn and the Last Word, we've barely touched the Ishtar Collective and their experiments on the Vex, we have not even seen the full events of the Reef Wars, or whatever the Nine end up being, and as for the Exo Stranger, well, I suppose we will know in time, but your guess right now is as good as mine. In the meantime though, I want you all to go ahead and support this channel if you can. If you found this informative or enjoyed it in any way, then your support is very much appreciated, and you can do so in one of a few ways. Of course, there are the typical YouTube things, such as liking this video, or simply subscribing to the channel, or turning email notifications on so that you never miss my content. But on top of that, there are other things that you can do. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions, I will try my best to answer some of them. And on top of that, if you really enjoyed this lore video and you're considering supporting more projects like those that you saw which were animated within this video, then you can support my Patreon. Patreon.com is something that helps me create these higher quality lore projects, and they do not get funded without your help, so anything you can spare is highly, highly appreciated. It's also well worth noting that the excess from all of these projects goes to charitable causes at the end of every month. And so we are paying our way back to the world. If we can't support the artists, we will be able to at least support others who are very much also worthy. You can also join my Discord server. Being a Patreon member means that you get special privileges in Discord, but you can also join for free. Or alternatively, you can go ahead and subscribe to me on twitch.tv. And of course, I want to extend one final shout out once again to those two Guardians that helped me out significantly with this video, Xander and Octavius. Both of their channels or respective social media will be linked in the description below. If you join our Discord server, you can also thank them personally. But in the meantime, this huge video could not have been made possible without your constant support. I know there were many that wanted to hear the story of Destiny told through a more condensed and understandable form, and I hope that this has served you well. But in the meantime, I thank you very much for all of your attention and the time you took. And in the meantime, my name is Bife. Per audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.